Easy things, yeah. Right next to each other. So. Yeah. Oh, that's yeah. Okay, good morning, everyone. It's 9:30 and we shall resume the inquiry. So we are beginning cross-examination this morning. So, Mr. Humphreys, when you're ready.
Thank you, Madam. Thank you very much. Stuart, good morning. How nice to see you again. Mr. Stuart, if we go in proof to paragraph 1.5, so that's your proof, paragraph 1.5.
Yeah.
Outline very helpfully for us there the two principal areas that you cover in your evidence, and I'm going to follow that same sort of format. I'm going to go through those sorts of things. So I'm going to start with the first of them, which you deal with in your section 2, which is noise contours. And in section 2, that starts on PDF page 5, you review the various noise metrics, including LDEN. To say in relation to LDEN, paragraph 2.4, so the sort of towards the end of that paragraph is the top of actual page 6. The London City Airport has used both LAQ and LDEN throughout its recent draft noise action plan. LDEN is possibly less relevant to London City Airport as it has no night flights. So I think although LDEN is a metric that is used in the European Union, and it is in some respects used as an alternative metric here, I don't think anyone's recommending that it has particular relevance at London City for the reasons you've described.
No, I think that's right. I think you're absolutely right. But LDEN really came in when the European Union mandated noise action plans to be drawn up, and the metric that the
European Union used was LDEN, and it required all member states, of which Britain at the time was one, to use LDEN. And that's why London City, in their noise action plan, it had been required, but are no longer required to use LDEN. But I do agree with you that I think for London City, as I say here, it's not a particularly appropriate metric because London City has no night flights. Essentially, LDEN measures a 12-hour day, averaging out, then a 4-hour evening, an 8-hour night. And it requires 5 decibels to be added to the evening, 10 decibels to be added to the night. As you probably know. Yes, okay.
Don't worry,
That's right. And because of the 10 decibels added to the night, that's why it's not particularly relevant to an airport that doesn't have
night flights. And you know, I'm sure what the DEN, the DEN is day, evening, night.
That's it.
That's what DEN is. But you go on then in paragraph 2.5 to point to the 2018 WHO guidelines, and you tell us that they argue that the onset of community noise starts at 45 LDEN. Because these guidelines are not government policy, they are clearly relevant because of the large body of evidence underpinning the recommendation and rigorous evidence-based methodology. You rightly recognise there, don't you, that recommendation from the WHO is not accepted by UK government. Can we just, partly for the inspectors' notes, just identify where that is? So could you turn to CD 3.5.4? 5.4. It's the aviation strategy 2050. When you've got the document, I'll tell you which page we're on to.
Yeah, we're there.
Yeah, and if you go to PDF page 77, it's actual page 75.
The one that says managing noise.
That's that.
Yeah.
And if we just look at the paragraph at the bottom, 3.106, which goes over to the next page.
Yes.
This is what Government said. There is also evidence of that the public is becoming more sensitive to aircraft noise to a greater extent than noise from other transport sources, and that there are health costs associated from exposure to this noise. The government is considering the recent new environmental noise guidelines for the European region published by the World Health Organization. It agrees with the ambition to reduce noise and to mitigate adverse effects. It wants policy to be underpinned by the most robust evidence on these effects, including the total cost of action and recent UK specific evidence, which the WHO report did not assess. So government is obviously aware of the WHO recommendations. It's not adopted them, and that's in part because it wants the most robust evidence base, and it doesn't believe that's available at the moment.
No, I think that's right. I mean, and I think what WHO, as it says here, didn't really look at was the cost of implementation of any of their noise proposals, be it road, rail, air, or anything else. And I think that's one reason why the government hasn't adopted it. I believe the government, civil servants in the Department of Transport are still saying that they are looking at it. but they've been looking at it since 2018. And my guess is that I'll learn how to use maps more quickly than they will come to a conclusion about WHO.
Yeah. And you know, the trouble in a sense with all inquiries where one's talking about noise and talking about these numbers is it's sometimes rather difficult to understand. So where it talks here about a 45 LDEN, a quiet library is 40 LAQ. These are very quiet levels of noise, accepting that, of course, this is a logarithmic scale, but even so, it's important, isn't it, to sort of just bear in mind every so often what the reality of living in a city.
I think that's absolutely right. I mean, my sense of WHO is that WHO always knew that this would be guidance. They're researchers, they're acusticians, they're noise experts. They're not really politicians. And I think they put it out there as guidance for politicians. I'm not sure in their heart of hearts they expected it to be fully adopted by governments. What I personally think is the significance of WHO is rather than their specific figures, which are absolutely right, some of them are terribly low, is the direction of travel. And it's the direction of travel that we were talking about yesterday, where a few years ago, in fact, at the time of the last inquiry around the city airport in 2016, 57 decibel contour was the accepted onset of community annoyance. SONA looked at that and said, no, it's lower. WHO looked at it again, or they didn't do work themselves, but they looked at they assessed studies, which found it to be even lower. So I think rather than look at the individual figures coming out of WHO, the important thing there is the direction of travel, that people, for one reason or another, are now finding noise, are finding themselves annoyed by noise or disturbed by noise at lower levels than was previously accepted.
And thank you. And 2.7 in the proof, you then
in my proof,
in your proof.
Yeah.
What I'm going to do is the golden thread through all of this is going to be your proof, and then I'll.
That's a mighty relief, I've got to say.
and then I'll go into other documents to sort of examine some of the propositions in the proof. But you are the golden thread, Stuart, as always.
For an hour.
And so 2.7 is that heading, and the essential proposition. My
2.7 or 2.17?
2.7 is issues with the appellant's approach. 2.7, which is at page 6.
Page 6.
It's a heading, but it's got a paragraph.
Oh yes, yeah.
And the sort of central proposition here and in part of the rest of the proof is that in effect the decision maker should take action, take into account that some people outside the lull, the 51 dB contour, are annoyed by aircraft noise.
Yes, that's right. Because I think, as I was saying yesterday, I think people are affected. We've heard that from a number of the individual members of the public. We heard it from Tom Cryer MP, the area who is talking about Wanstead is well outside the 51 decibel contour. So I think there is a need to look at it. And what I was suggesting yesterday is a suite of metrics which would give a more comprehensive picture than simply looking at 51 decibel contour.
And we're going to be obviously talking about that, but you capture this in paragraph 2.9. I won't read all of it, but third line, you make the point that there is evidence that people outside the 51 contour are annoyed by noise from London City aircraft, and then a little bit, well, you refer to Dr. Nold, and then a little bit further down the same paragraph, the majority of Haqqani's supporters who directly experience impacts live beyond it. And so two points there that we're going to be examining. One is obviously the 51 threshold and what it means to be within or outside it, but also the point that Haqqan East represents people, the majority of whom are outside the Lowell.
Yes, I think that I haven't got the exact figures in front of me, but I think our supporter base has, the nature of it has changed over the years. I think to start with, the majority of people would have lived fairly close to the airport, certainly within the 51 decibel contour. I think one of the key reasons why it's changed, is what I was talking about yesterday, is the onset of the in 2016 of the concentrated flight paths. That people close to the airport have always had concentrated flight paths. People further away didn't have them, and I think it was in 2016 that we had a considerable number of people join us from outside the 51 decibel contour, and I think that's what changed the balance.
Yes, and in the succeeding paragraph, so paragraph 2.10, you introduce so where you then go with this, we can see is that you say the site later 2.14, you talk about unless three complementary metrics are applied in practice, an accurate picture is impacted, and the three metrics are introduced. Paragraph 2.10, single mode contour, which you mentioned yesterday. 2.11, the N contour, N above contour, it's sometimes called. And thirdly, the cumulative impact approach. So we're going to touch on those three. So firstly, can we just talk about the N above contour?
Yeah.
And there are two that are commonly looked at, N70 and N65, and we're focusing here on N65. And the reason for, we told us yesterday, for looking at complementary metrics derives from the aviation policy framework. Do you remember you took us to paragraph 3?
That's right.
319.
Right.
So I'm going to give the inspectors, because we had it yesterday, I'm going to give the inspectors the reference. We don't need to go there because we looked at it. So it's CD 3.5.1, paragraph 3.19. And this is where the government say they recommend that average noise contours should not be the only measure, and that one should look at other metrics. And we just see, though, and understand the context and reason for looking at other metrics. And I want to take you to the SONAR report.
Yeah.
So the SONAR report is CD 3.7.4.
Maybe
3.7.4. And again, I know you know this, but I'm just noting this with inspectors. Although it says survey of noise.
This is where not we. I struggled just. There's several.
Yes, it's the one without any letter suffix.
Third one down, right? 1, 2. Yeah.
Yeah. And although the title on the front of the version is SONAR noise Attitudes 2014, it's important to note that this is second edition.
Yes.
This is the updated edition. So this was a later working. And can we just turn within that document, PDF page 71? That's actual page 70 if people are looking at the paper copy. Because it's important that the inspector should understand the relationship between the principal metric and supplementary metrics. So on that page, PDF page 71, we get the question, is LAQ6 now still the most appropriate indicator? Because this is one of the things that Sona was looking at. And it tells us the study compared reported mean annoyance scores against average summer day noise exposure defined using the 4 different indicators. We can see them, one of them is N65. Evidence was found that the mean annoyance score correlated well with summer day noise exposure, the LAQ16 hour. There was no evidence found to suggest that any of the other indicators correlated better with annoyance than L16. Having said this, the study recognized, this is the important bit, the study recognized that residents can struggle to understand the concept of a time average matrix such as L16 and LDEN, and the fact that it is measured and reported on a logarithmic scale with a change of 3 dB representing a doubling or halving of noise energy. There is therefore merit in considering greater use of number above metrics as supplementary indicators to help portray noise exposure, but recognizing that evidence-based decisions would continue to be based on the 16-hour LAQ. In this context, N65 is preferred to N70, which is why we've given that data, as noise events in many areas are already beginning to occur at levels less than 70 dB LA max and are forecast to reduce over time. So because aircraft are getting quieter, that's why we used to look at N70 and now look at N65, yes, because N70 just doesn't capture enough events.
Yes.
So of course it's acknowledged that supplementary metrics should be used, and they have been used here, but it's important the inspectors should understand that the decision is still based on the LAQ16. The N above number is used because people don't understand, not all people, but many people don't understand this averaging effect, and they still think in terms of numbers of events.
Yes, I think that's basically right. And as I was saying yesterday, what Mr. Thornley Taylor was saying, it's absolutely right. I think LAQ is a legitimate and as Sona has found a fine metric, and that's not and I'm not disputing that. But what I am saying, so repeating a little bit what I said yesterday, is that I think for people these days, because as we said, planes have got a bit quieter and certainly considerably quieter over the last 40, 50 years. If you go back 50 years, the complaints were about the noise of the individual aircraft. Planes these days, unless you're living very close to an airport, tend to be about the number of planes going over at a particular time. And I think that's why the N metric is important. And I think it's particularly important in the case of London City Airport because of the concentrated flying paths. Because when you're getting the planes, you're getting all the planes. And that's why, we would say it is, it mustn't be used instead of LAQ, because that's a fine metric. But there is a relevance, particularly for this airport, of using the N metric as well.
And what I want to do then is now take you to what the N65 metric tells us what it shows for the airport in 2031 with and without the development. So we're going to go to the big A3 document, CD 1.39.
That's the maps, yeah.
That's the maps.
Okay, so
And for those looking in PDFs, it's PDF 88.
what was that, the reference?
Sorry, the plan itself is figure 8.3.44. Here, tell me when you've got to that.
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
This is the 2031 do minimum, i.e. without the change in conditions. It's the N65 event. You can see here the different colours. So the lighter blue is 10 to 24 events. This is obviously an average over the 92 days, and the number of events are daily events. So not events per hour, but events per day. You can see the arrivals contour to the south of the airport that you're concerned with. That's the easterly arrivals. It's slightly counterintuitive in that the aircraft where you've monitored, where Dr. Nolt has monitored them, are travelling westerly, but they then turn. And,
I know.
and so that's actually, that's an easterly arrival.
Yeah.
And then you can see up to the north a departure route. See there that in the area you've monitored, and precisely where the monitor would be, that's indicating on a daily, an average daily event, either 10 to 24 events or 25 to 49 events per day. If one turns on, however, so that's with the do minimum without the Section 73 consent. If one turns on to the next page, we have the do something. And that easterly arrivals is not much different. In fact, the westerly departures, the N65 contour north of the airport with the development is actually smaller. So those people benefit from the development because of the quieter aircraft.
Yes, I mean, I don't know whether this might be better put to Dr. Nold. I think he'll be covering some of this in his evidence. Yes. About the quieter aircraft, because we clearly have
a view on that.
We have a view on that, so it might be better holding.
Okay. Can I just take you to one more figure? So can we just look? So we've looked at that with I, and we see the difference between the tables. Could we turn to what is, I think, CD at 130 again, and I think it's the just checking that my sure it's been reproduced in this hard copy, because I think what's been reproduced in the hard copy is not the whole of CD1
That's right.
39.
It's
The inspector asked for the contours.
Yeah.
So I'm afraid I'm going to have to ask you to look at the electronic version, because I was doubting myself, because I had a reference to a table and it doesn't appear in the thing. So
Yeah.
if you could look at the electronic version, I'd be grateful.
Right, so just remind me, we're on CD.
1.39.
CD 3 is at 1.89.
No, CD 1.39. 1.39. It's appendices to the next chapter.
Does Mr. Greer's evidence then?
No, it was part of the ES. It was, I think, appendix 8.
And
It's take your time.
yeah, I'm not sure. I put it on my.
It's probably not substantive, but it's back one level. But I think what you might look at is only the column which beginning with number 3. And so
Yes, I am.
back button once you might then get the opportunity to look at column with number 1.
You're right. Thank you very much. Okay, so just remind me again.
It's CD 1.39.
Up to the
It's
a map as a
It's far easier for me to run over documents I want to go to. So you just take your time. 1.39.
Yeah, we're just looking exactly like what the inspector showed me. So I think we're either both right or we're playing snap again. Yes. Okay.
Right. And then turn to PDF page 30.
Right. Yes. Daytime ends 65. Yeah.
Yes. And I'm going to take you to the second of the tables there.
Yeah.
And one could go to the first or go to the second, but I've taken the second. The first is area and the second is population. And what one can see there, so the highest number in the N contour events, so the 200s in each case, but that's closest to the airport. That's where you're getting 200 events above N65. And the N10s, if you remember, were the pale blue, the furthest from the airport. If we look at the 2031 due minimum and development phase, one can see that for those areas furthest from the airport,
Yes.
So the 10 events, the development case actually is a smaller contour table, 8349, and the population is smaller, 8350. It's only when we begin to get very close to the airport that the development case is higher than the due minimum. And of course, that's the very area that is captured in the Lowell and Seoul contours anyway.
That's right. I think 2 comments. One is that it is a mixed picture, as you say, because closer by there's situation will be worse, further away will be better. But the related point is, again, I think this may be better brought up with Dr. Node, because we have a view on whether the planes are actually
Of course, I mean, that's absolutely taken as read, and I will
Yes.
ask him.
So I'm giving him all the difficult questions.
No, I try and do that with juniors.
You're not my junior, you're definitely not that.
But insofar as, because you've invited us to place reliance in relation to your 10 members and further from the airport, place reliance on the N65 contour. I just wanted to see what the N65 contour says, and it actually says.
I mean, and that's the value of actually having these figures here. It's definitely worth looking at them because we have placed a bit of value on it. But as I say, Dr. Noel may well be able to add to what I have to say.
Then your next area was single mode contours. So if we stay in this document,
Yeah.
having taken you to it, I'm now
I'm just saying it. Yes,
taking you away from it. But if we stay in this document and we turn to PDF page 33, this is where you suggest we should look at single mode contours as a supplementary metric, and we do. Inspectors have that data.
Yes.
And what the top of page, PDF page 33 tells us is this section presents the summer day, night and summer day weekend, day, night, weekend noise contours based on either 100% westerlies or 100% easterly operations. The areas of noise contours presented along with the number of people, dwellings, etc. for 2019. Only the dwellings and population counts, excluding permitted developments, are presented as permitted developments were not built at that time. And obviously, same to blindingly obvious, but the inspectors, when looking at this set of metrics, do need to understand that, of course, the airport does not operate 100% on easterlies or 100% on westerlies for right days of this upper period. This is an artificial contour to look at an extreme case, in effect.
Yeah, yes, in that sense, yes, right.
And we can see, again, maybe it's easiest if I give you a PDF page. So if we stay in this document, and we go to PDF page 109, and I've looked at westerly mode, but we could look at easterly mode. So this is assuming all aircraft through the entire summer operating westerly mode. In fact, they'd only be doing that for about 70% of the time. They'd be in easterlies for about 30% of the time.
Yeah.
But if they were 100% westerlies, that's the contour on page 109. And if we go to the next page, we get the one with development. So 109 was without the proposed development. 110 is with the proposed development. And again, we can see that looking at an all westerly contour makes actually very little difference. We'll look at the figures, it does make a slight difference, but very little difference to the size of the contour.
Yes, again, I think Dr. Noel may have something to say about the noise of individual planes, but yeah.
And again, just to help the inspectors to quantify that, because it's difficult to see the difference visually, if we just go back to page 33, PDF page 33, where we were.
Yeah,
we can see that in 2031, the Doom something case at 51 dB.
Sorry, which table you're at?
I'm so sorry. Table 8.3.64.
Yeah,
That outer contour, the 51 contour, we can see is slightly bigger in the do something case, the development case rather than the minimum case. It's actually smaller in 2027 and 2025, but interestingly, in both cases, it's smaller than 2019.
yeah,
And of course, what you may guess it with Stormy Taylor, 2019 was an actual, it was not the permitted size of it. Permitted size of operation of the airport. So again, you've invited us to look at the single mode contours. If we look at the single mode contours, what it tells the inspector is that even with the proposed development, the noise climate will be materially better than the 2019 actual and only very slightly different from the June minimum case.
yes. I mean, again, that's making assumptions about the so-called quieter planes, which we may not necessarily accept. As I say, Dr. Noel will talk about that.
Completely understood.
Yeah, I don't think this so takes away from my central point that the single mode contour is a useful contour for people in a more comprehensive way about the impact of noise in communities, which is really the central point I'm making about all these contours.
And again, what the inspectors, in fairness, need to understand is, and it's a different context point that Stormy Taylor was making, that the social surveys in sonar that correlate noise with human reaction to noise are not correlated against single mode contours because the airports don't actually operate 92 days in a single mode. And so one just needs to bear in mind that one cannot just take a single mode contour and say, look, this is human reaction to that because there is no social survey.
No, I think that's right. I mean, I think the 92 days, which generally, as we know, is used, does make it more difficult for single mode contours. I mean, I think one would probably ideally look at a longer period of time because you can get in London or in Manchester, where some of the work was done with sonar, you could get 90 days continual easterlies or westerly winds. It's unlikely, but you can get it. So I think if single mode contours are going to be used and assessed, it's ideal, though it would be difficult because 92 is the established period, but it would be ideal to be looking at something a bit more than that.
And perhaps we can just explain to the inspectors why the UK uses the 92 days. So the L10 is an all-year contour. The UK uses the 92 days as a worst case, isn't it? Because
it's worst case.
Let me just point you. No, don't worry.
I think I was going to agree with you. I think I was going to agree.
I think you were, but let me just encapsulate the points. You can tell me I'm right or wrong. The 92-day summer period is about 25% of the year, has more than 25% of the movements because it's a summer period, people in the UK, and therefore it's a worst case period. If one averaged over the year, the contours would be smaller.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. That's what I was actually going to agree with. That's absolutely right. That's why it's used. As I say, so for single mode contour, it could be a little bit tricky because if over the summer period, say we had 90% westerly winds, we might be struggling a little bit, but Humphries is right. The summer is used for that reason.
And if again, just to help the inspectors with single mode, if we go back to sonar, just so that they can contextualize single mode,
Right, so we're back in
CD 3.7.4. And we're going to turn to
survey. No, survey of noise attitudes. Yeah. Yeah, sorry.
and we turn to PDF 72. Yeah, 72, and we get paragraphs 11, 811 and 812. And that tells us that while evidence was found indicating that easterly mode noise exposure correlated best with mean noise, westerly mode noise exposure was found to have the poorest correlation. This occurs because respondents were found to be more annoyed by easterly mode exposure compared to westerly mode for a given noise level. Practically, this means that single mode contours are unsuitable for decision making, but they may be helpful for portraying exposure and changes to exposure. And it's a further point relating to the point we were talking about before. We're told to produce them so that people can understand what it is, but they're not actually very useful for decision making.
The point here, I think, is really interesting, and it's what we get from our members, and it's also what Heathrow residents talk about. People who are most concerned about being, as it were, being left out of the noise contours when they feel they've got really a lot of planes going overhead, are those who are under the easterly winds, because only about 30% of but that 30% of the year, it can be very intensive. At City Airport, it can be totally intensive because of the concentrated flight paths. And so while what is said here is correct, I think we would argue that it is very useful in decision making to get a proper, in order to get a proper assessment of how annoyed people are during the periods in which they're going over, planes are going overhead, that a single mode contour is useful. It's particularly useful for those under easterly flight paths.
Yes. And the third type of contour you mentioned, which was combined contour, so London City and Heathrow, I think, as you told us in your evidence in chief, is really desirable but impossible to do.
Well, it's not quite impossible, but it requires at least more than one airport to play ball. In this case, largely London City and Heathrow, although there is some overlap between in the Sidcup area between London City and Biggin. But so it would need. I think rather than being left to the whim of airports as to whether they're going to negotiate with each other, we'd really like to see some sort of guidance or directive coming from the Department of Transport that in a situation like this, the airports are required to act together in order to draw up a cumulative assessment.
Understood. Now, you then deal with impacts on overflown aircraft, and we we just need to understand, in a sense, what the Lowell is.
What page are we on here?
Well, you start to deal with these things on your page 8 PDF and
Yeah,
actual page 8 impacts on overflow
yes,
residents, and you draw the point about Lowell, which is the lowest observed adverse effect level on human health and quality of life. And we know that that concept comes from the noise policy statement for England, which introduced Lowell and Knoll. And so,
Yeah.
Again, I don't know whether we need to go into it, but the Knoll level is where there's no, below the Knoll level, there's no effect that can be detected. At Lowell, this is the level at which adverse effects on health can be detected, but they're not significant at that point. That's where you get to Seoul.
yes, yes.
And so, in terms of the noise policy statement for England, the effects that you and Dr. Nold are talking about below the Lowell, outside the Lowell, are areas where you may be able to notice effect. You can see aircraft fly over, you can hear the aircraft, but this is below the level at which Turner and other studies have detected any effect on health and quality of life.
I don't think that's quite right, because I think Sona didn't go, as I said yesterday, Sona didn't study below 51 decibel contour. They didn't do that for two reasons. One is, I think their budget was limited, but secondly, they said, and they rightly said, that the lower you go, the harder it is to be entirely accurate, because the aircraft noise can, which is at a lower level, then merge more frequently into the background, the general background noise. So it's not a question that they said there is no disturbance below 51 LAEQ. They said that they had done that work, and as we said in some detail yesterday, there is nothing in government guidance saying that you can't go below that. In fact, the government guidance allows airports to measure as they wish.
Yes, but obviously, Sona and Sona data and the Sona reports started in 2014 surveys, but there were then the subsequent reanalyses. If at any point the CAA had considered that the effects went below 51 in the subsequent reports, they could have indicated this. And in fact, what has happened is that they simply haven't thought it necessary to do so. At no point in any of the reports do they say, look, we actually think now Lowell goes below 51. And more work needs to be done on this.
No, they don't explicitly say that. It's absolutely right. But what we were saying yesterday, it's very clear that there are people disturbed below 51. We're hearing that. We hear that from our members. We heard that from MPs. We hear that from many of the London boroughs, as I was saying yesterday. Many of the London boroughs, most of it, who objected to this scheme, where the original scheme, the Newham hearing the inquiry, were most of the people live below 51. So there is an issue there. I think neither now the CA or the government have said there is not an issue there.
No.
What they have simply said is we will measure to 51. But they haven't gone yet. I think it would be a mistake to read into that the fact that the CAA is saying there is not an issue below 51.
Let's, I'm going to take us in stages, so 2 or 3 different things. First thing I want to just get you to clarify for the inspectors, lest there's any sort of confusion from yesterday, is the different concepts of Lowell
Yes.
and the onset of significant community annoyance. And could we look at this in Mr. Greer's proof of evidence, where he sets this out? Tell me when you've got to
Yeah, I've got a paper.
right. It's actual page 31 for paper, and for those in the electronic, it's page 32. Paragraph 5.8.1. It tells us, based on the government's guidance as described earlier, the following contour values are relevant in terms of assessing daytime airborne noise. 51 dB, the threshold below which there are no observed adverse effects from air noise. That's on health and quality of life. This represents the low. The exposure above it attributed substantive description of impact of low. And then 54 dB is the indicator of the onset of significant community annoyance. Onset of significant community annoyance isn't 51, it's 50 dB, 54 dB, isn't it? We can look at that in Sonar, I think, if we need to. Are we?
Yes, I mean that's how
Just
describes it.
Just for the inspectors, I mean, I think we've agreed that, but just for the inspectors, note where that is made clear in Sonar is Sonar, which is CD 3.7.8, and they would need to go to paragraph 270.
Yes, just to add, I think from memory, Sonar found that it's either 7 or 9% of the population experience annoyance at 51.
No, it's 9% at 54.
54.
So, well,
I
let's
think it may be 7% at 51, but I haven't got to. I can't remember.
well, I'll take. Let's look then at. Let's go back to Sonar, and we can look at it. Which is CD 3.7. Four.
So in the Sonar document, it's 3.7.4.
It's 3.7.4 is the document. The PDF page is 56, and this was one of the points that I can take into it because it's called a tail. Great familiar with it, but I was talking to him about the dose response relationship, and he mentioned that I was
Right. So there's the table. Yeah.
yeah, figure 8.
Yeah.
So what you have here are the dose response relationships. Amount of noise and percentage highly annoyed.
Yeah.
For the different reports. Sonar, it's not but Sonar is the most recent line. Sonar is the one that starts very near the red, then drops down below the red. So on the 69 dB, starts very near the red, drops down below the red as you go down and then ends up slightly higher than that. That's sonar, and you can see that. Yes, I mean, it's not perfect, and
It's about,
Some-
it's about 55, about 5% people.
and this was the previous study, and so the onset of significant community annoyance is set at when about 9% of people are highly annoyed.
Yes.
In other words, 91% of people are not highly annoyed. And you can see for ANIS, 9% was at 57 dB. And for sonar,
It's 7%.
well, for sonar, the 9% is about at 54 dB.
Yeah, that's right. But we were saying earlier on, and the figure I hadn't, I'd sort of forgotten, but I think it was right. It's 51 is 7% and 54 is 9%. Yeah.
And if we just look in that document for a moment at PDF page 57, this is where it gives the text that is slightly easier for us.
It's all in black and white.
Yes. Yeah, the same percentage of respondents said by ANIS to be highly annoyed at 57 now occurs at 54.
Yeah, that's it.
And that's the basis on which, and there's in other documents that 54 is now the onset of significant community annoyance. We can see that tabulated again below the figure that we were looking at on page 56. You can see where the 9% are. So that's the 54 is the onset of community annoyance. Now, your point is that at below 54, there are still some people, even at very low levels of noise, right down to 45, there are very small percentages of people who will be annoyed.
That's exactly right, yes.
And the point here is that, of course, that is the case, but what government has done, has drawn a line, some of which has drawn a line and said it clearly, particularly in urban areas, there are limits, and 9% is the threshold at which we regard that as being the onset of significant community annoyance, as opposed to a very small number of or percentage of people being annoyed.
Yes, I mean, we're not anyway challenging these certain figures, because I think I know Darren Johnson did the report, and he's a very credible researcher. So we're not challenging this. I think all we're saying, as we were saying yesterday, is that it is to get a comprehensive picture of what's happening at London City Airport with its concentrated flight paths. These other metrics are useful to be properly assessed and used.
Indeed. So just two now short points. I just need to ask you one or two questions, and then we're all done. So the whole first part of your evidence was about different metrics and using them, and what they should tell the inspectors, and you examined that. Your other principal point identified in the proof was to do with local conditions and the density of population. So this is your section 3. It starts on page 9. And obviously, London City isn't the only airport close to residential properties. We know that, but obviously the density of population is simply reflected, isn't it, in the population figures within the contours. That's what it does. So we don't just look at the size of the contour, we also look at the population.
Yeah, absolutely.
And they will be higher. And if we look, therefore, at if we look back at CD, I think it's 139 again.
Yeah, 139 is open. Yeah.
And we just turn to PDF page 21. It's a figure that we looked at before, but in a slightly different context. Is that 21?
Yeah. So starting daytime, yeah?
Yes. And table 8.3.18.
Yeah.
We can see that the development case 2031 numbers within the various different contours there are all lower than the 2019 figures.
Yes, that's right. Again, I know he's coming up very soon, Dr. Gold, but that'd be a chance to ask him about some of the our concerns about the estimation of the quieter claims.
Absolutely right.
Yeah.
To remind me. Under local conditions, your other related point is concentration of flight paths, and that's the 2016
Yeah.
change that came about. Obviously, that's a matter ultimately that would be a matter for airspace change, not where the aircraft flies, and a matter for the town and country planning
Yeah. Yeah.
system. It would be possible to produce approach routes, more than one approach route, but that's not a matter that we can control.
No, but I think it's 2 points. You're right. I mean, first of all, as I said yesterday, and I won't repeat it because I think the concentration is a key factor. It was a seismic change. It's a reason why so many more people are annoyed. But I think the other point, just related to what Mr. Humphries has said, is as you both may well know, the London airspace, i.e. all the airports are required to look again at their airspace because concentrated routes will be coming in at all airports because they'll be they're going to a satellite-based system rather than a ground-based system. It's happening worldwide. And clearly, if you're going to change your flight paths at one airport in the London system, you've got to change them all more or less at the same time. So an overall body has been set up to supervise and organise this. There'll be initial, I understand there'll be initial public consultation on possible new routes in 2025, and then with the new routes coming in about 2027, 2028. Now that is, you're absolutely right.
This is what's sometimes called FASI South, isn't it? FASI-South.
It's related, that's right. That is the opportunity for London City to, as it were, deconcentrated flight paths. It will still have narrow concentrated flight paths, but if it alternates, then you do get an element of relief, except for people living very close to the airport. That is not there right now. And certainly presentations made to the London City Consultative Committee on which we sit has shown that London City are thinking about respite, and their plans were really shot through with the idea of respite. So that's no guarantee that will happen, but that's what we expect, certainly what we hope will happen. But we expect there will be some element of deconcentration of flight paths, which will ease matters for people. This is beyond this inquiry, but I mean our argument always was there shouldn't be any further expansion until those flight paths were sorted out. That they won't be sorted out for 4 or 5 years' time, and we're here today. I will be sitting here in 5 years' time. So you know.
The inquiry's finished.
Yeah, you hope the plan is finished. Yes, exactly. So do I.
Yes, cross-examination didn't continue quite that long, but very last point. In
He
your
quickly adds.
yes, exactly. In your rebuttal, you responded to a short
Yes.
point that Mr. Greer had made. He said, no need for you to look it up, but I'll just give the reference to the inspectors in his proof that 11.4.12, he had said people generally spend more time indoors than outdoors. Some surveys even indicate this could be up to 90% of people's time. And obviously, doesn't necessarily mean indoors in their homes. It might be indoors in a shop or in a venue or a restaurant or where they work or whatever, but generally spend more time indoors. And you responded to that in your rebuttal, and you drew attention to some data showing that the number of people that do visit green and natural spaces and so on, and that is undoubtedly correct that people do. But I don't think that goes. The fact that people spend most of their time indoors doesn't actually contradict the fact, does it, that some of their time they're not indoors and they may visit green spaces when it
No,
goes.
I think that's right, but I think what we were saying is that the survey which we relied upon was underestimating the amount of time people spent outdoors. And in particular, the survey which we looked at, which we think is a very credible survey, as I was saying yesterday, it emphasized in particular how people in built-up areas value urban green spaces.
Understood.
And I think that's the difference between us.
Thank you. Mr. Stewart, as ever, a pleasure. Thank you very much.
See you in 7 years' time.
Exactly. You should understand we've known each other many years.
It's a small world planning. Oh,
Oh, yes, no,
turn yours. Working, yes. I do have a couple of very short questions
Okay.
for you. And it relates to a couple of the final points that were put to you. So I'll ask you the question. I'll turn my mic off. You turn yours on, and hopefully between us it'll work. The concentration of flight paths is something that's come out in the consultation responses, and you've talked a lot about it in your proof. And yes, it's not something I could condition planes in a decision that come in at different points to assist or anything. So how can you're involved in the consultations, and you will be making representation and putting your views forward?
You want to use it? Yeah. Okay. Yes, we are. I mean, we've been involved quite closely in the consultation. We will be, and when it goes fully public, there's been two-stage consultation. One is for kind of sort of interested parties like Dan and some of the residents groups, and then it'll go fully public with some more detailed information. As I say, probably end of this year, early next year. So there will be opportunities. I think just one point on that. If alternating flight paths do come in, that would be hugely welcome for many people, because it will give the respite, ease the situation. But of course, for people who are close to the airport and arrivals or departures, there can't be alternation because planes have got to line up with the runway, as we said yesterday, and for them, if this proposal goes ahead, they will be getting planes Saturdays as well as planes during the week as right now. So there'll be no break for them, even if other parts are able to get some sort of alternation. Right.
Preempted my second question. So yes, you did. I was just wondering, in a world in the future where, you know, we might get more sort of distribution of the paths, I was going to sort of ask you your position. Obviously, we don't know what that might be, so it's a little bit of an unfair question, but you know,
We don't know. I think there's a possibility of more alternation at a large airport like Heathrow, particularly when they've got two runways, and planes can turn in to their whatever runway they're going to use closer to the airport than they do now. So there could be a number of flight paths going into Heathrow. For London City, with one runway and a smaller turning space, as it were, it'll be very, very difficult to get people closer to the airport, either on arrivals or departures. A little bit easier on departures, but on arrivals or departures, any real relief or respite.
thank you. That was very helpful. And then just one very quick point. You've talked about there being substantial residential development in the vicinity of the airport, and that's planned for the future as well.
Yeah.
Are you aware of the concept that's embedded in the NPPF of the agent of change?
Not really, no. I'm intrigued, but
Do some bedtime reading if you wanted to take that. Okay, that's all my questions. So thank you. Dr. Lane, did you have any re-examination questions? I mean, are you happy to continue now without a break?
Yes.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Yes.
We on? Yes. Thank you. Mr. Stewart, if I could just take you back, I'm afraid, once again to CD 1.39. I just have.
we're glad to know I'm actually in it.
I have just a very small number of questions, just because there was quite a lot of discussion between you and Mr. Humphreys about the easterly mode contour and the relevance of that, and the fact that potentially in line with sonar, people are more annoyed in that space. He took you through the anticipated size of that contour on the development case versus the do minimum case, and we'll hear from Dr. Knoll about what we say about mitigation. But I just wanted to ask you a couple of questions to get across something about this, sort of in absolute terms, the size of the easterly mode contour. So if I could take you within that document, please, to table 8.3.17, which is at PDF page 21.
Yes, yeah.
And we're looking here at the average mode summer day, so the average mode summer day contours. If you could just, on the tell us from that, let's just focus on the development case, so the 2031 development case.
Yeah.
What's the size of the average mode summer day contour predicted to be if the development goes ahead by 2031?
The size,
Sorry, so this is table 8.3.17, top table.
Yes, top table, right, okay.
And so we're just looking at just that top row of numbers, essentially. How big are we predicting the average contour to be, the 51 decibel average contour to be by 2031 on the development case?
Compared with 2019?
But just in absolute terms, how big is it going to be?
Okay, 22.7.
Yeah. So, and in the table below that, which is the population counts, how many people are anticipated to be living within that average contour by 2031 if the development goes ahead?
The average 51 decibel contour.
Yeah, the average 51 decibel contour.
Yeah.
For the air noise population count.
I think this is very interesting. It's 160,000 people.
Yeah.
Now, that is that is bigger than a medium-sized town.
So we've looked there at this is for the average mode contour, so the accepted study area. And if I could take you now within that same document, please, to page 37,
Yeah, just. So,
PDF page 37.
yeah, we're there.
We're looking here at the same tables, but for the easterly mode contour on an average summer day. How big is that predicted to be on the development case by 2031?
Right, that's 44.1. If I remember rightly, that's almost double what the previous figure.
And what about the number of people predicted to live within that easterly mode contour?
Right. That number is 323,000. Now that's more than a small town. You know, that's a city.
And how do those numbers compare with the average mode contour?
Without, does that to do minimum, you mean?
Oh, sorry, I think you've more or less answered the question in that you've said that the area is doubled. I was just asking whether you had any comment on the numbers of people that were
No,
predicted to live.
it's a huge difference because we're going from a small town to a small city. That's the difference in population. So, and I think sometimes in London we tend to forget how large numbers actually are. You know, if we were somewhere in somewhere like Edinburgh, which I think is a population of about 600,000, that is half of Edinburgh's population would be overflown by a 51 decibel contour. So outside London, the numbers are put into perspective a little bit. We just tend to forget in London just how many people are actually under flying cars.
Thank you, Mr. Stewart. I have no further questions, Madam.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Stewart. That concludes your examination. So you're relieved of duty. So thank you very much.
So relieve of duty and relieve. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Right, we'll have a break now before we hear from the next witness, Dr. Knoll, so you can prepare yourself. So if we have 20 minutes, so if we come back at 11:10, thank you very much. Yeah, welcome back everyone. So we'll now commence with the second of Hakan's noise witnesses, Dr. Knoll. So Dr. Lane, over to you.
Thank you, Madam. Oh, yeah. Welcome, Dr. Knoll. So Dr. Christian Knoll is a lecturer at the School of Engineering and Innovation in the Faculty of Science, Technology and Engineering and Mathematics at the Open University. He has more than a decade of experience in citizen science, including coordinating an 11-partner Horizon 2020 project, which worked across multiple countries and languages in the EU, engaging 4 million EU citizens via 715 public citizen science events. He holds a PhD in civil, environmental and geomatic engineering from University College London, and his PhD research focused on noise monitoring apps, quite similar to the one that we're talking about today. Since 2005, he's created multiple large-scale public projects and published more books and articles than most of us will in a lifetime, which are listed at paragraph 1.5 of his proof of evidence. I hope that the inspector should have Mr. Knoll's proof. Dr. Knoll, welcome to the inquiry. I asked Mr. Stewart this briefly yesterday, but just to ask you to clarify, how does your evidence interact with the evidence that we've already heard from Hakan East on noise?
Thank you. Yeah, I'm going to be talking about something very specific. So it's great that Mr. Stewart kind of gave the umbrella conditions around things like LOL. I'm going to be talking something very specific about the mitigation and the cleaner new generation aircraft, cleaner, quieter new generation aircraft.
So if I'm going to, as I did with Mr. Stewart, go through some aspects of your proof and ask you to just sort of expand a little on them. If I could take you first to the beginning of section 2 of your proof of evidence, please. And this is at PDF page 6 for anybody working digitally. And actual page 6. There's a section here on the value of citizen science. And could you just start by clarifying, we've used the term a lot, what do we mean by citizen science? What is it?
Citizen science is basically members of the public working together with scientists to produce real research. They can work in different modes. Sometimes they're contributing towards a larger scientific research project just set by the scientists. And sometimes they initiate research themselves, and the scientists work more in a kind of adjudicating quality assurance manner. So there's different modes, but basically it's a massive movement that's really started, well, a long time ago, but it's really a kind of big growth area since the 1990s, when kind of smartphones and mobile media kind of came into being, and it made it easier for members of the public to collect data. So environmental noise and kind of environmental pollution is really one of the big areas that citizen science is very active in.
And what value do you say that citizen science research methods can add over and above conventional research methods?
I mean, there's many famous examples of citizen science researchers discovering new galaxies, new stars that basically were undiscovered before. It's a lot of scientists see it as free labor. There's a lot of people basically, putting their time and effort into this, a lot of retired people working on this. But basically, it's a huge amount of effort being put onto these topics that sometimes there's not a lot of funding for. One of the key areas I would say is that citizen science can also work in areas where scientists do not necessarily have access to or do not necessarily have a particular interest in. So I've been involved in indigenous hunter-gatherer communities, for example, trying to stop illegal logging, for example, and the scientists work together with these hunter-gatherers to kind of help this. So this is kind of an area where that would just totally not be possible without citizen science. In this particular case, it's really about certain residents that are, feel an effect and want to kind of gather data around that particular problem. So citizen science can act as a sort of canary in the mine, if you like. It can detect where there's a particular problem where the science is a little bit too slow to kind of catch up with it.
And regarding the data that's actually collected by these projects, do you have any general comments on how we should think about the accuracy and or the reliability of data generated by citizen science research?
This is one of the big areas of discussion within citizen science itself. how do you ensure the quality of citizen science data? And there's a lot of papers in my proof. I discuss some of them, but basically it's one of the real topics that gets discussed. They are, in some ways, the problems are the same as any research. You need to ensure that there's kind of a kind of decent research design. You need to have a kind of coherent methodology, but there's also ways in which you can do checking. You can have more senior experts, if you like, collecting data with the members of the public themselves. There's a whole bunch of different methods that have been evolved over time to really ensure this. But one of the things that I would say is distinctive about citizen science is often large quantities of data that are often not available in other contexts. And actually, empirical data that otherwise would not exist is one of the real key topics. But I linked to one of the papers, basically, which really gives you a nice set of criteria to go through on how to assess the quality of citizen science. Maybe we can talk about that at some other stage. I don't know.
Is that the Kosmala paper?
Yeah.
So, okay, well, let's go there now briefly. So that's CD 3.7.42. And I believe that the criteria that you're talking about are the ones at the top of PDF page 3. Is that correct? Sorry, I'll give you a minute to get there.
Sorry, I messed up with the document. Bear with me.
Not at all. So that's 3.7.42.
This paper, I mean, it argues, for example, years of citizen science project should look for iterative project design, standardization, and appropriateness of volunteer protocols, data analysis, capture of metadata, and accuracy assessment. And then a little bit further is this larger table that kind of breaks it down into more detail.
And to be clear, when you, in your experience of designing these kinds of studies, are these the kind of criteria that you would use in order to set parameters and to ensure reliability of data?
Very much so. I mean, I think you need to use them all the time. And in fact, I did use them in this particular study we're going to be talking.
Thank you. So we've talked a lot about the study and the citizen science study. Just to be really clear, when we're referring to that, which particular study are we talking about?
So it's called Citizen Science Study of Overflight Noise from New and Old Generation Aircraft at Dublin City Airport. It's currently in review with Community Science, so it's a peer-reviewed journal. It is, I'm the first author, but we also have a number of other authors, including citizen science researchers. Professor Muki Hakla is the second author on this paper.
And that, for just noting purposes, the core document reference for the study is CD 3.7.20. But there was another earlier version of this research, wasn't there?
Yeah, that's right. So this whole study was initiated by some concerned residents who live within, well, the single contour area. We'll talk about that later, I think. But yeah, it was really initiated by some local residents who were trying to address this question of these new generation aircraft, because essentially there was no data available. So they wanted to find out for themselves. One of the kind of key drivers, I think, for a lot of citizen science.
Was that before or after you came to be involved in this project?
I came on board later to actually look at some of the data and to analyze it and to help kind of clean and standardize the data.
And so you mentioned there about cleaning and standardizing data. How has the version of the study that you were involved with moved things on from that earlier version?
Well, as I said, there was kind of standardization of the data, but there was also some additional data collected. And I think I worked with some of the citizen researchers to really work on the analysis and what we can really pull out of the data. Specifically, what can we really say about new and old generation aircraft?
I'm going to ask you a few questions next just about how you designed this study. So when you were designing it, what was the proposition that you initially set out to investigate? And it might be helpful here, I think, if people could have CD 3.7.20 open.
So this research question did not come from myself, but it came from the citizen researchers who really wanted to do a real world comparison of overflight away from the runways of the Embraer aircraft in particular. So in consultation with the researchers, we decided to focus on particularly the two versions of the same aircraft, the Embraer E190 and the E190-E2. So that one is the first generation, the other one's the second generation aircraft, and trying to compare the noise level between these two. So we chose not to look at some of the other new generation aircraft because there's other kind of issues. The Airbus, for example, is known for making whistling, wailing noises. Some of the other new generation aircraft that haven't been introduced yet are much larger and actually are much noisier. We thought the most accurate comparison was actually between two versions of exactly the same manufacturer's aeroplane.
And if I could just take you, please, to the bottom of page 3 in the study, so in CD 3.7.20. And to the table at the bottom of that page, table 1. So this is a table that you have reproduced from the London City Airport Benefits and Mitigation Statement. What's this table showing?
So this is actually data that's produced by the airport based on the static noise monitors that are at the airport. I think it's from 2019, if I'm correct, which is actually doing this comparison between the E190 and the E190-E2, so the second generation aeroplane, and it's showing the difference at arrivals and departures. And it's making, it's showing that there's a big difference, for example, during departures and lesser during arrivals. So just to kind of reiterate, these are the static monitors at the airport only. And again, this study wanted to look at what was the noise situation away from the airport.
Moving on then to how you actually conducted the study, how was this data actually collected?
So this particular study uses a mobile phone app called X-Plane, which is runs on iPhone hardware, and it's specifically designed for noise monitoring of aircraft. So it was designed in Holland, and it has very specific features in that it identifies the plane that's causing the noise. So there's no kind of question of what is actually the source of the noise, and it sends the data to a central repository. So it's customly focused on this, and if it cannot identify the plane, it will not allow you to send the data. So it takes some of the kind of quality issues and some of the quality control that I mentioned around citizen science. It really takes that into account.
How confident, in your professional opinion, can you be about the reliability of data that is collected via the X-Plane app?
So I would say it's right to be cautious about mobile phone apps. This is not a calibrated noise monitor. There was a study done in Holland that compared data that was collected from the app versus the official airport LEEQ data, as far as I understand, and it found a plus or minus 2 dB range of error, basically. So it's within a margin of 2 dB. That means it is useful, but I would say it cannot be relied on for absolute measures. So what is significant about this study, it does something very clever in its study design. It does not try to identify the absolute level. It tries to do a relative comparison between two different planes using the same hardware. So even though this app may not be the most reliable thing in the world, it allows us to make a relative comparison between these two planes. And it has a standardized piece of hardware. So I think it is very good at being able to create a relative comparison.
just for noting purposes, there is a reference to the study from Holland about reliability that Dr. Knoll just mentioned at paragraph 2.32 of his proof of evidence. When you were designing the study then, Dr. Knoll, how did you choose which sites your volunteers were going to monitor aircraft noise from?
So, because the study was based on using mobile phone measurements, it was important to have a number of measurements to be able to ensure quantity of data and have some comparison being set up. So one of the unique features, I think, of London City Airport is the shelved flight path. The idea that the planes basically descend and fly for a long time at a very low level, 2,000 feet around that sort of point, and then for the last approach. So the target was really easterly approach flights within the shelved portion of the approach. So the idea of having multiple measurement sites within the shelved flat portion allowed you to take multiple measurements in a way that you could compare them. And because of the concentrated nature that we've heard about from Mr. Stewart, the very narrow flight path really allowed you to have a very controlled way of taking measurements. So this is a very specific, unique feature of London City Airport that was actually very useful for the study design. And I think it was very, very smart from the citizen researchers to really target that particular feature.
And we can see the sites that you eventually ended up choosing at page 10 of your proof of evidence, figure 3. It's a slightly tiny map, but hopefully should serve to show what we're talking about. So just have a look at that. And then at the same time, if it's possible for people to turn up figure 8.3.81 in the core document 1.39 again. So that's the easterly mode contour map again. Sorry, it's 8.3.81. I'll just see if I can find the PDF page reference. Sorry about it. You got it. Great.
Yes.
So if you could just explain what we're looking at, Dr. Knoll, in both in your figure 3 and in this easterly contour map and how they compare.
Indeed. So if you take a look at those kind of blue dots within the study, the measurement sites, they're comfortably within that sort of tail, that long tail of the easterly approach. So while they're actually geographically quite away from the airport, they're actually within the shelved approach flight path during easterlies. That's where they were located there.
So just to be really clear, you were monitoring from sites that were outside the average mode contour, but inside the easterly mode contour, is that right?
Within the single mode 51 dB LEQ contour, indeed.
And just while we've got these documents open, if we could just flick on a few pages in the A3 to figure 8.3.39. So this is the N65 contour. And again, how does that compare with your monitoring sites?
Again, they're in the same kind of area. We're in the N65 25 to 49 events area. So the darker blue area.
So turning to page 13 of your proof of evidence, which is where you present at figure 4 a summary of the findings. Can you just talk us through this table? What are we looking at here? What were your headline findings that you think are relevant to the inquiry?
Sorry, PDF page.
Sorry, it's PDF page 13 of your proof, 1.3.
Sorry.
Sorry, yes. It's figure 4.
Yeah, so that just shows the kind of particular aircraft that were captured. So you can see it's predominantly the first generation Embraer aircraft, and there's quite a lot of the Airbus and then the Embraer second generation aircraft. And it starts giving you some of the dB at max levels, but there's another diagram that illustrates it better.
You can take us to that diagram if you mind.
Thank you. So yeah, just the next page in the PDF, page 14, it precisely creates this comparison between the older and the newer generation of the same Embraer aircraft, as I mentioned. So you basically see the difference between the older and the newer is only 1.7 dB max.
In terms of a 1.7 decibel difference, at paragraph 2.41 of your proof, just below that figure 5, you talk about what level of difference might be sort of perceptible in normal conditions. Can you just comment a bit on what the relevance of that is?
So this is from the CAA website, and it's just an acknowledged fact within the kind of this area that basically a change of 3 dB has been defined as the minimum perceptible under normal conditions. So when we're talking about a 1.7 dB difference between the new and the old aircraft, according to this particular classification, it would not be perceivable. So if you imagine standing in a field, you would not be able to, from the noise level, really be able to tell the difference between a new and old aircraft.
London City Airport have also recently published some noise monitoring data. And if I could take you, please, to CD 3.7.55.
3.7.55.
Yes, 3.7.55. So it's the document entitled Aircraft Noise Surveys Overflight Measurements.
Yeah. Oh, yes.
So what is this document?
So this is fascinating. Basically, triggered by the citizen science study, the airport rushed out a report 1 week before the start of the public inquiry to address the new generation aircraft and produce their own data, something that until then, I've been told, the airport was not, was reluctant to produce, or they were kind of keen to produce data, but it had not been provided, hence the need for the study. So we're actually very excited because the study, first of all, addresses the new generation aircraft for the first time. So while there were community studies produced by the airport before, they never looked at the new generation aircraft. So this is the first time that new generation aircraft even featured in some empirical data. So before, the only data that was available was really at the airport during these static noise monitors. This is the first kind of study produced by the airport that actually addresses the difference between the new and the old generation aircraft away from the airport, so during overflight. Particularly, it looks at 2 sites, in Lambeth during arrivals, and bear with me a second, the other one is in Ilford during departures.
We'll come on to those sites in just a moment, but just to be really clear, when was the data collection for this study done?
As far as I can see, it was produced during July and August, but there was no consultation that I'm aware of. I mean, this is data that was released 24th of November 23, but it must have been collected, I think it says collected in July, August that year.
And so the 24th of November, so that was after you had submitted your proof of evidence.
Yeah.
So if we could turn, please, to page 11 of that document, PDF and actual page 11. No, sorry.
To produce your proof.
No, sorry. No, so the publication was after Dr. Knoll's proof, but the data collection was before, is my understanding.
Oh, I thought I couldn't do the thing. Luke should have stuff.
That's it.
Thank you. So page 11 of that document, please, which has a map of the survey locations.
Yep.
Mentioned a minute ago that there was, well, can you just explain to us what the numbered points on this map mean, and then what Lambeth and Ilford are all about?
Right, so the 1, 2, 6, in the yellow dots in the centre, those are the static noise monitors from the airport. So this is where those kind of numbers that we looked at originally come from. This is sort of something like a 5 dB difference that the airport is basing the projected contours on these static noise monitors. The white circles with Lambeth and Ilford, basically these are the new studies. And just to note that that Lambeth study is precisely in that same N65 25 to 49 contour that we looked at earlier. So it's just curving round a bit. And similarly, it's in a single mode contour that we also looked at earlier. So what's significant is that these are really within the same shelved approach flight path or easterly flight path. So what's remarkable is that they are very, very similar in terms of being able to give us a similar picture of the noise level at those two locations within the shelved flight path.
And is the Lambeth site within the averaged 51 decibel contour?
It's not within the average one, only in the single mode.
Okay, so that's the same as your monitoring sites?
Indeed, yeah.
If I could take you, still within this document, to table 1, which is on PDF and actual page 7.
Right. So what's significant here is that this is basically data that was collected by the airport using a Class 1 certified meter. And what we see, if you look at the Embraer 190, if we look across at the average LA max, we see 71.8, and then we see the Embraer, it's called an E290, and this is the second generation Embraer of a 69.9. So if you subtract one from the other, you get a difference of 1.9. Now, if you remember from the study I mentioned before, we found a difference of 1.7. This finds a difference of 1.9, so virtually the same.
And just for my benefit as much as anybody else's, what's that third column of that table talking about? Where is it? Average cell.
Right, average cell. Cell is a particular way of measuring noise. That's actually very useful in that it measures the actual noise energy for a particular event. It is unfortunately quite difficult to calculate using basic noise monitors. So the smartphone app does not record cell. So this report is extremely helpful because it actually uses exactly the same metric of the LA max that the citizen science study produces. So it actually produces a Rosetta Stone, if you like, that allows to compare between the two that would have been difficult otherwise. So we're extremely grateful actually for basically, on the one hand, validating the citizen science study, but also producing a comparison that shows that we are talking within the same language and within the same domain.
And you said that for validating the citizen science study. Why do you say that this survey validates your findings?
Well, I would say precisely this figure of 1.7 and 1.9, their closeness, and the fact that this is much lower than the particular airport's figures of something like 5 dB difference at the airport. So this is the significant thing. So basically, just to summarize, away from the airport, the new generation aircraft are almost indistinguishable from the old generation aircraft. That is the key finding, really, which is being supported by using calibrated, official sanctioned noise monitors.
And near the airport, around the runways, would you accept there that there is an audible and meaningful difference between new and old generation aircraft?
Indeed. I mean, there's a significant difference between arrivals and departures. You know, I guess I know nothing about this data, but I'm certainly not challenging the data that's produced by the airport. My point is simply that there was no real data available away from the runways.
I'm going to take you now to Appendix 2, so that's B2 to Mr. Greer's proof of evidence. Because there were, in this appendix, this was a comment on the Hay East citizen science study, although as I understand it, this was a comment on the original version of the study before you came on board, is that right?
I think this is actually a response to the study, so to the study, citizen science study, as in its current form, as far as I understand, because it refers to it as a citizen science study.
Forgive me, that's perhaps my mistake. You let me know when you've got that up.
I have it up.
Oh,
yeah,
okay, sorry. So there's a few points I would like to just draw your attention to in this document, give you the opportunity to respond to. So paragraph 2.1.4, Mr. Greer notes that the study area is located substantially outside of the Lowell contours in the environmental statement, which are a matter of common ground with the London Borough of Newham. So I just wondered if you had any response to the fact that they're located outside of the contours.
It is true if we define it according to the equalized 51 LEEQ contour. I mean, I think we've heard a lot in the last kind of 2 days on how this Lowell is a proxy and is not quite the same as the kind of impact on people, which is really about behavior and attitudes that are being affected. So I would say, you know, it's significant, for example, in some of the guidance that below 4,000 feet it is considered, but that's likely to be within the Lowell. So this, for example, from the UK Air Navigation Guidance, it says below 4,000 feet, there's a strong likelihood that aircraft could create levels of noise exposure above the Lowells. So it is indeed true that the study took place outside of the equalized 51 contour, but I certainly suggest that there's effects that local people feel within the particular study site, as evidenced by noise complaints in Lambeth, for example. It's actually the area where the airport seems to be receiving most of their noise complaints from.
And then at 2.1.7, Mr. Greer notes that the study area is overflown by the easterly flight path. And again, this is the essentially point I think we believe we discussed with Mr. Stewart, but that the easterly flight path is used only around 30% of the time. So that's only around 15% of flights, arriving flights. And therefore it's kind of a minimal proportion of overall London city traffic. Do you have any comments on that?
Again, as we discussed, this is actually about weather. Right, so the easterly westerly thing is really about weather, and it's about predicted future weather. So as we can see, we're having rather extreme, rather unpredictable weather going forward. So who knows whether in the future we're still going to have these 30% going forward. We've had a lot of conversation about summertime, how in the summer, for example, you can have easterlies for quite extended periods of time. The key thing is that this is unpredictable. This is not respite. So you cannot plan for when this is going to happen. The wind changes and suddenly you get flights. So because this is often happening in the summer, this is the time when people are outside. This is when people want to be enjoying themselves. The kind of area that we're talking about in this easterly approach area, there's something like 100,000 people living in this. Even if they're kind of summertime enjoyment at the weekend on Saturdays is disturbed, that makes a big difference.
Thank you. And further on down at paragraph 2.1.8, the third issue raised is that the citizen science study might be of greater potential relevance to the airport's ongoing airspace change proposal in connection with the CAA's airspace modernisation programme. So this is again about redesign of flight paths. Would you agree that it might be more relevant to that proposal?
I mean, it certainly has relevance to that particular proposal in the sense that this particular shell flight path is, of course, affecting local residents much more than having a continuous descent flight path. So simply approaching at a higher level and then going straight down would put less impact on local residents. But as we can see, and I think as I've illustrated, this is having a big impact on this particular, the question of whether we extend flights on a Saturday afternoon. So I think it's particularly relevant to this, as well as the airspace change proposal.
And finally, at paragraph 2.1.11, there's a note there that the surveys for the citizen study were not, as far as I'm aware, undertaken by appropriately qualified persons or using certified or calibrated sound monitoring equipment, using survey methodology in accordance with relevant British standards. So essentially, comments on the potential reliability of the data. How would you respond to concerns about the reliability of the data?
I mean, I think I've talked quite a lot about quality assurance, how to do that. I would say, I think I've never heard of any citizen science study that ever tries to can meet these kind of British standards. In fact, most of the acoustic specialists I talk to don't even have access to these British standards, which cost about £200 to download in the first place. So it's very difficult to meet to these particular standards for citizen science studies. So indeed, it is a different kind of data that's being collected here, but as we can see, it is particularly relevant and it is supported by the study that was carried out by the airport, which had essentially the same findings as the study.
Just very briefly, Dr. Null, if I could just take you back up to the top of this appendix, 2.1.1, which says that the citizen study referred to is the Haycan East SO, or in the Haycan East SOC statement of case, was first published in August 2022 and was updated in February 2023. Is that the study that you were involved with?
I was not involved in the first study. I'm not sure I understand quite what this is.
But your understanding still is that the rest of this appendix is referring to the study that you were involved with?
I mean, I assume it's addressing relevant relevant things. I can't see how it's not. Yeah, I mean, basically, just to be clear, there was a report that was published beforehand, but I don't think this is substantially addressing this. I think it's addressing the particular evidence that's supported to this inquiry. I'd be surprised if it wasn't.
Thank you. That's maybe something we can clarify later. I just wanted to make sure we hadn't been misleading on that. I only have a couple more questions, but just sort of overall conclusions then. What would you say can be extrapolated about noise levels from overflying aircraft, both old and new generation, in locations other than your 6 monitoring sites or the airport's monitoring sites from the data that we have available to the inquiry?
At a basic high level, we can see that these kind of cleaner new generation aircraft, as they're always called, they are not universally quieter. It depends where you are, and it depends under particular conditions. So this kind of universal phrasing that's kind of being employed here, I think is difficult to sustain. As the study basically found that when you get away from the immediate proximity of the runways, the benefit of these new aircraft goes down significantly to a point where they are not perceivable, at least within this particular study. And I think it basically raises a key question, I think, about the Lowell area and precisely where it is drawn, because as far as I understand, the contours that are produced for the future expansion case are based largely on the particular measurement data produced at the airport proximity itself. So what we don't know is we don't know the gradient from the particular measurement sites to the airport. So we know that there's some significant impact at the proximity of the runways, and we know that there's very little benefits away in these particular sites at the citizen science study and at the point where Lambeth, the Lambeth study, I think. So we know that there's very little benefit in those places, and there needs to be some point where these two intercept. So we don't know if, for example, the benefits of the new generation aircraft drops off very quickly. So this is important. I mean, as we've heard before, the new generation aircraft, what they actually are, they have improved thrust settings. They seem to be more efficient in terms of the engine noise that's being generated. So when they're not using the engines, the benefits might drop away very quickly. The impact might be that the actual lull area is actually much larger, might be encompassing a much larger number of people. We simply do not know. And I think that's a really significant question to be discussed basically when we're talking about expansion, when we're talking about the number of people that are affected, when we're talking about future scenarios going all the way to 2031.
And what data do you say would be needed so that we could be confident about that gradient?
I think there needs to be more studies carried out precisely beyond that point of the 0.5, the static noise monitor. There needs to be more empirical noise measurements to really identify how, at what point the kind of thrust benefits from the new generation aircraft basically are cancelled out.
And final question for now, how do your findings in your study affect your view of the adequacy of the proposed embedded mitigation, so the quieter planes, with respect to the current appeal proposal?
So it's always beneficial to have quieter aircraft, of course. It's just, I guess the study just raises questions as to how beneficial they really are. And, you know, it seems to be the main mitigation that's offered by the airport. This is my personal opinion, that the new generation as being the main mitigation seems rather limited in its potential.
Thank you, Dr. Nod. I don't have any further questions for you at this stage. I'm sure Mr. Humphries will have some.
Okay, thank you. Do you want to just swap mics? Yes. Just while we do that, just on the point of clarification, the CD 3.7.20, I've just had a look. On page 16 PDF, it does say under acknowledgements, this paper extends the preliminary report. I can't speak. Preliminary report. So I believe it's the second, but it'd be good just to double check and clarify that we are all talking to the same one. That's my understanding. Okay.
If you give me a second while I get those documents up. Just get that last two if it's okay. Yeah. Thank you for getting the documents out. And just to clear up this point about which version of the study, it's clear from Mr. Greer's appendix 2, he says in terms that he's reviewing CD 3.7.20. So he clearly knew what that document was and the CD reference to it. And when we look at CD 3.7.20,
on the front page, you're identified as the lead author. Therefore, I think that's pretty conclusive that that's the right report, isn't it?
I believe so.
Now, your evidence, as you tell us, is clearly looking at and drawing on the citizens' science study, and you tell us at 2.23 in the proof at PDF page 10, sorry, PDF page 9, actual page 9, about the 6 monitoring sites that you identified. And as you were taken to earlier on the next page, you identify where these are. And I'm going to come to points in a moment that you're not agreeing with the data, but all of these sites are outside, indeed well outside, the 51 dB LAQ contours, aren't they?
The equalized one, indeed the average one, yeah.
The average one. And you can see that in the contours. I don't think I need to take the inspectors to that, but it took us to the single mode contour. And you will remember I took Mr. Stewart to this, that single mode contours were something that the sonar study looked at in detail and rejected as being unsuitable for precision making.
From what I remember it saying, it actually had the highest confidence. So it had to.
No. Shall we look at it sonar?
Sure.
Go to sonar.
That has the 4 documents, right? Do you remember what that?
It's the one without it.
Sorry, no, what was the code that's in the? Yes, it's the one without. Yeah, got it. Thank you.
Let's look at page 72. PDF page 72.
Yeah.
And sorry, my notes. And what paragraph 8.11 says that whilst the evidence was found indicating that easterly mode noise exposure correlated best with mean noise, westerly mode noise exposure was found to have the poorest correlation. This occurs because respondents were found to be more annoyed by easterly mode exposure compared to westerly mode for a given noise level. Practically, this means that single mode contours are unsuitable for decision making, but they may be helpful for portraying exposure to noise. So you get this contradictory set of correlations that if you look at them overall, the correlation is just considered unsuitable.
Just the first sentence says, easterly mode noise exposure correlates best with mean annoyance, which actually this 0.95 is actually better than the LAEQ. The LAEQ, as far as I remember, was something like 88. So in fact, the easterly mode noise exposure seems to have a better correlation than the LAEQ, in fact.
Yes, but obviously, we know that these single mode contours are artificial. The airport doesn't actually operate in easterly mode for 100% of the time. It actually only acts in easterly mode for 30% of the time. And if you said to people under that easterly arrivals flight path, oh, are you equally happy to have overflights 30% of the time or 100% of the time? They would say, well, no, we go for 30% of the time. Why would they go for 30% of the time?
I think there's a particular reason why that question was not asked. That doesn't seem like
Well, why would they go for 30% of the time?
Why would they ask that question? It seems like
Why would they go for 30% of the time? Because it's better to be overflown for only 30% of the time.
Look, I'm taking your point here, which is that easterly mode noise exposure correlated best with mean annoyance score, much better than the LEEQ. So what that shows to me how relevant the easterly mode single mode is to annoyance. It seems to be as simple as that.
But we can obviously agree that the residents that you're discussing at your monitoring points are not actually overflown on a single mode easterly approach for 100% of the time. It's an artificial worst case.
In the same way that
Is it an artificial worst case first?
yes,
Yeah.
but so as we heard yesterday, Mr. Thornley Taylor was talking about how LEEQ itself and the LOL itself were artificial constructs. The LOL itself is an artificial construct. So these are all artificial policy instruments designed to help us. So the question is which one we choose, and I think this is the discussion, right?
And we also looked again. I don't think I need to take you to them, to the N65 contours. The end result in all this is that for decision making, government policy supported by SOMA is clear that the average 92-day LEQ is the appropriate one that is used in UK decision making. Ethics may not agree with that and think they should do something else, but that is the official basis on which decisions are taken.
We've spent the last few days looking at that very much in detail, that is indeed the one that's being used. And as we talked today, supplementary metrics are important. When we talked about the N above, we talked about single mode. Yes, I think these metrics are all important. And I think we talked about the specifics. I think that the key point I want to make is that London City Airport is unique. And I think it's been made before, but I think it's worth making specifically. We heard about the concentration of flight path, but I think this shelved flight path is specifically unique. And I think it's due to the shelved flight path that we need to think about this single mode contour, which really illustrates this shelved flight path, which otherwise is lost precisely. So I think this really illustrates the uniqueness of the air.
And we're going to come to that. If we just go to some of the N65 contour plans, so again, we're in CD 1.39. And look at two plans, figure 8.3.44 and 8.3.45. There's the 2031 figures of the do minimum and then the do something. We can see, and your point, obviously, these are the averages, that the numbers of events over a period of time, typically, that people would experience in the sort of areas that you surveyed were between, some of the measuring points are actually outside that contour, but between 0 and 49 typically.
25 to 49, as far as I can see in that blue area.
In the dark blue area, but I think 1 or 2 of your measuring points are actually outside the dark blue and the light blue area. And that's why I would say, I suppose,
I can't say exactly, but let's agree it's 0 to 49.
and that's on average is going to be between 0 and about 3 an hour.
By the way, this is actually, of course, it's not 0, it's 10 to 49, if anything. The lowest threshold for the N65 is 10 pence. Sorry, I missed your question.
So, and that's obviously per day. So over a 16-hour noise day, we're talking about, on average, number up to about 3 an hour.
I don't know about the hourly frequency.
But all I've taken is 49. I've divided it over 16 hours. And that seems to be consistent with your own data. Your paragraph 2.38, so this is your proof. Again, like Mr. Stewart, I don't want to think he's unique. You too have a golden thread, which will be the proof. So we'll keep coming back to the proof. So we'll pick that up. So we'll keep coming back to the proof. So what is available? So 238. You said the data set comprises 291 data points derived from 193 distinct flights. Primary data collection span from July the 21st to August the 13th. Not necessarily, I'm sure, every day during that period, with supplementary data collection on the 27th. So my understanding is that there's nothing inconsistent there with my average of, on average, up to about 3 an hour.
I think it's significant that at the moment there's actually very few.
Supposing rather than making another proposition, sorry to interrupt you, if you could just firstly confirm whether you agree or not with the proposition. So the proposition was that looking at those N65 data, that led to a daily number and then an hourly number. I didn't see anything in your paragraph 238 that contradicted that, but it seemed to be consistent.
I'm sorry, I'm not sure I understand the link between the two. I mean, as far as I understand, the airports don't operate in even spacing, so presumably that those kind of flights will not arrive in kind of even spacing across the day.
I get you an
I'm not
average.
sure I understand the point.
Then let's move on. You then tell us 238. Sorry. Yes, you tell us in 238 about the data set, and then in the table below, set out the different aircraft types, the number of measurements. So you have more measurements than flights. That presumably reflects 2 people capturing the same aircraft.
Right. I mean, that was one of the goals, to try and have
Sure. Yeah, not a criticism. And your average dB max is, so dB max is the maximum noise during a 1 second time interval, isn't it?
I think the app it does a 10-second measurement and it looks for the maximum noise during that 10-second overflight.
Yeah, but it's done it correctly, and I assume it has. And this is a dB max slow. This will be it's what the average is during the peak during the 1 second.
It's the peak, yes.
Yeah. And we get those figures. So the what you're calling there, the average DB max, what is you've done, as I understand it, is you've taken a whole series of DB maxes for each measurement. So MBRA 190, you've got 188 measurements. And the average DB max, what you've done is you've taken each of the DB maxes, the 1 second maxes, and then you've averaged those.
Indeed, yeah.
Yeah, that's what I thought. And again, it's a point I put to Mr. Stewart, and a point that's obvious and you expect to well understand. It is important to understand what these sort of noise levels, what is a dB max of something in the low mid 70s? What does that compare with? So could we go to another document, CD 3.7.45? And this is a
Sorry, 3.7.45, yeah.
3.7.54. I apologize if I put it wrong.
So it's paper frost comparison, yeah, urban transport.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
So from the Institution of Civil Engineers. And this was a paper that was looking at transport in a different context, but it gives us some useful comparators. I want you to turn, if you would, to PDF page 5. Figure 5. And this is LA maxes. And it's the typical data measured for the pass of cars at 30 miles an hour at 7.5 meters distance. And you can see what the maxes are. They're in the mid 70s. So these measurements that you're talking about in your survey for these aircraft that will happen certain times. We go over that. Are equivalent or similar to the noise of a car passing at 30 miles an hour at 7.5 meters. Not that.
I have no way of comparing a car.
No, see well, that's why I produced this way. That's why I didn't just say it was similar to a car, but actually produced an Institution of Civil Engineers a survey of the noise of a car. So we're talking about people in, as you said, a dense urban area. And the noise this far from the airport measured is similar to not a car at 1 meters, but a car at 7.5 meters. You have no reason to doubt, just the data there.
No particular thing to say about it, except it doesn't take into account, again, the kind of, I presume you're heading towards a cell, it doesn't take into account the length of the sound exposure, and it doesn't take into account the quality of the noise exposure. I mean, I've mentioned before, the wailing, the whistling noises, people are used to cars, and they certainly don't get shocked when a car goes over, but I can certainly tell you that when a plane goes over, people stop speaking, they stop all kind of normal human life. When a plane goes over, this is not the same as a car. So obviously there is a clear difference between them. While we might get a similar kind of spike like this, the actual qualitative experience is rather different.
Yes, but when we look at your data, the citizens' science survey that you're presenting, we can see that the figures are similar. Now, obviously, the inspection can go out, and sure the inspectors have gone out to these locations. They may even have heard airplane noise before. But insofar as they want some concrete comparisons, they can see there, can't they, the comparison between the noise at the distance from the airport that you're measuring and the noise far, and that obviously is relevant to them.
I mean, this paper is precisely about being able to compare different forms of transport, and it precisely talks about cell as a metric for being able to produce a better comparison. So I'm surprised that you point to the DB max as the kind of particular metric to create that comparison, when cell is precisely the metric that is used to kind of create a comparison between different forms of transport.
Yeah. That you haven't produced cell.
This is why they have the paper.
And the paper here is not particularly helpful in that regard. What I'm trying to do is draw a comparison with the data that you have.
Just to say, this is precisely why the study produced by the airport is so useful, in that it produces cell data, which actually shows that even using the cell metric, the difference is very low between the new and the old generation aircraft.
We'll come to the difference between the new and the old generation aircraft. Cell obviously just takes sound energy and compresses a long amount of energy into a particular figure, but it's the same sound at the end of the day, isn't it?
Energy, yeah.
Sure.
It's fun to have a noise interruption.
Now, what you do, we can see it in your figure 6, but also in other figures. So this is your PDF, page 15, is that you make comparison the iPhone data between you and older E190 ones, Embraer aircraft E190 to E190. But the inspectors need to know, very clear about it, that these are all remote from the airport and well outside the calculated low contours. Yes.
Yep.
And one of the points then make, and this is in your figure 1, which is on your page 8, and you explain to the inspectors, is that your measurements are all in the shelf part of the flight path, not final descent. And obviously the final descent, it doesn't happen 200 meters out from the airport. It happens a long way out from the airport, doesn't it? And the contours produced do stretch out and reflect that final descent, don't they? They don't. The LAQ average contours don't go. 51 contours don't go out to the shelf.
I don't understand. I don't know how the approach segment overlaps with the LAEQ contours.
You don't. Okay. And Mr. Thornley Taylor explained this point in his evidence. I don't know whether you have access to his proof.
Yeah. The proof, yeah.
So his paragraph 6.3.7, which is page 32.
Six point three points. So
Think of the left.
sorry, I'm on page 32,
3.7.
6.7. Yes, yeah.
And it's a point that's well understood. Thornley Taylor happened to make it that close to the airport, figures produced by the appellant's consultants are not likely to be materially accurate. Further away, where aircraft thrust settings are low and airframe dynamic noise predominates, the difference between the two groups of aircraft would be smaller. However, the formal way of assessing aircraft noise effects does not place weight on noise closer to the airport, and smaller effect place weight on noise closer to the airport, and a smaller effect in the introduction of quiet aircraft distance from the airport does not come through the conventional noise assessment methodology. Though aircraft noise associated with LCY results in representations from residents in locations many miles from the airport, the noise index values are not computed at such distances, and significant effects in the context of formal environmental assessment not arise. The point that he's making, and it's illustrated in a sense in your figure 1, is that the reason the citizen survey may be detecting smaller differences between the new generation and older aircraft that far from the airport is that the aircraft there are affecting in cruise, it's airframe noise that is more dominant. But once they start to descend, which is still many kilometers from the airport, when they start to descend and the engines become relevant, that's where the new generation aircraft, the new generation engines are materially quieter. Now, if Mr. Thornley Taylor is correct in that, what that demonstrates, I think, isn't it, is that your survey points that you see on figure 1 just will not have captured the quieter engine noise during the descent phase.
That's precisely my point, is that actually for the vast majority of people overflown at London City Airport, the kind of benefits in the thrust for the new generation aircraft simply do not apply.
Yes.
That's the other way of phrasing precisely the thing you just said.
Closer to the airport, and we can look at the Bickerdike Allen Partners noise survey in a minute, but closer to the airport, the noise calculations there will be accurate because that is where the airport monitors are. The airport monitors aren't just on the airport, they are, again, some distance from the airport.
I mean, there's basically 6 monitors, so 4 in close proximity of the airport and 2 at the flyover points. So yes, we're certainly not disputing the particular measured data at the airport. The point I was trying to make,
the point I was making at the airport doesn't mean kind of at the in the runway. The overall fixed monitors, many of them are quite some distance from the airport. The plans are very small, it makes the distances look small, but we're looking at really quite considerable distances.
my point is a simple one. If you, on this, on figure 8.3.4, the location of the flyover point is within the green contour area, the 57 to 59 dB, and the lull area extends way beyond that. If you could have a look at that and just the equalized LEQ. So I kind of positioned the 0.5, the static noise monitor, within the green contour area there. I marked it on my one.
Yes. So, but that's exactly my point. in those areas where one's looking at, the takeoff and landing phase, or cruise phase, but the takeoff and landing phase, there, the noise of the quieter aircraft, because the noise is dominated by engine noise, the new generation engines, the surveys in the Brigadier Gallen survey confirms that the new generation type aircraft, the newer aircraft, are quieter.
1.9 dB in the terms of the Embraer, which, as I mentioned, is not perceivable. So something happens in between the static noise monitor at 0.5 and the Lambda study.
Yes, the 1.9 I think is a Lambda study.
Yes.
Yeah, so that's again very remote from the airport. That's well outside the Lowell contours.
Indeed, yeah.
But if one takes the static monitors that they looked at as well, which are closer to the airport, still considerable distance, but in that phase, the study confirms, doesn't it, that the monitoring is correct. The aircraft are, the assessment is correct. The aircraft are quieter.
They're quieter, but not perceivably so. I mean, that's the kind of the key point, right?
But this is your 3dB point. Sorry.
Yeah, 3dB. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, we can, we can discuss the 3dB. We had a discussion yesterday about whether 1 dB above Seoul was material. But so, thank you for your view that it should be 3 dB. But
can I clarify this?
Of course.
There's a big difference between kind of a dB max, sort of a peak measurement, and LEQ. So basically, when we're talking LEQ and averaged, a 1 dB can indeed make a massive difference. Whereas when we're talking a peak noise, there's very little difference that's perceivable. I mean, you just have to do some audio recording. You can tell that just nudging the knob on your stereo makes very little difference. Whereas when we're talking about a 1 dB in LEQ, it makes a massive difference. So we're talking about vastly different metrics here.
Rather than arguing it, obviously again, inspectors, will be going to have gone out on site. They will form their own judgment on those things. But do you disagree with or doubt the results and the conclusions of the BAP study? Do I need to take you through that here? Or
sorry, I'm not sure which one.
Sorry, I'm talking about CD 3.7.55 is the one you referred to, and I think you said, I'm not doubting that. It's all very scientific and helpful. Just want to know whether I need to ask you questions about it or whether it's...
What exactly would you like to, what point do you want to make about it? I mean, I think, it's, I mean, I would note that the data is not available for the citizen science study. It is totally open data, and anybody can analyze our data for this if I do not have access to the data. So it's hard to say anything beyond just having the report in front of me.
Let's look, for example, at page 9, analysis. And there it sets out those results in comparison between the E190 and the Airbus and the Embraer 290. And it continues under that table 5, these assumptions derived from the noise monitoring terminals in the period 2019-21, average improvements across the 6 fixed terminals. Latest results are similar, slight reduction in improvement for arrivals, very similar improvement for departures. Comparing the overflight survey results, so that's the remote Ilford and Lambeth. Comparing the overflight surveys for both arrivals and departures, the improvements for next generation aircraft not as large as those measured at the noise monitoring terminals, where it's still clear that the next generation aircraft are quieter and therefore represent a benefit in noise terms. The departures is to be expected that the benefits of the next generation aircraft, which primarily relate to improved engine performance, would reduce during the sections of level flight, remote from the airport stuff. This is due to the engines being at a lower thrust, and so noise from them is a relatively smaller component. The lower thrust also contributes to significantly lower noise levels. The Ilford location and fixed monitoring node closer to the airport, measured levels in Ilford under the level flight were over 10 dB quieter than those measured noise monitors, and over 20 dB quieter than those measured. So there's this point about comparison, but all of these remote locations are outside the levels. Now, your essential assertion based on your data, and you make this point explicit at your paragraph 3.4. That's your paragraph 3.4, which is on PDF page 22. Is that this raises questions about the accuracy of the modelling, being able to predict the noise impact of future extended airport away from the proximity of the runway. But the point is, the airport hasn't forecast contours down to 48 or 5 or anything like that far remote from the airport. And so your citizen survey data, which suggests that the aircraft, the difference between your and older generation may not be as great, makes no difference to any contours being abundant here, does it?
Well, I think it's significant that the low.
Does it make any difference?
It does, because
Okay.
precisely it questions the contour. Let's call it the gradient as we enter towards the. We have a number of known points. We have the known point at the airport, the particular static measurement sites around the runway, and we have the flyover point. And now we have some new data away from it, which beforehand did not exist. So what we have is we have a slope, if you like, but we don't know the direction of that slope, and we don't know how that slope, the particular shape of that slope. What's key is that the Lowell contour extends way beyond, if you like, the known area. So if you like, we're in the sort of Kirby Dragons area that we just know nothing about, and suddenly we have some idea that beyond this, actually the difference is much lower. So it allows us to ask quite legitimate questions, in my opinion, as to how far the Lowell area really extends. And if it extends much further, we are talking about impacting a much larger number of people.
With respect, Dr. No, that's completely wrong. Your citizen survey only tells us about what you call the shelf. You've only surveyed the shelf. It doesn't tell us anything about the takeoff and landing phase, because you haven't surveyed that. And it's the takeoff and landing phase where the new generation aircraft are materially quieter. That's what we see being represented in the LAQ contours, isn't it?
I'm suggesting that nobody knows anything beyond that particular fixed point. Do you agree that we know that there's no actual empirical data for the extent of this low? This is all modeled in the back.
Dr. Knoll, do your citizen survey data tell us anything about the landing takeoff phase?
No.
No. And do you suggest that the landing takeoff phase is not represented in the contours?
As I mentioned before, I don't know how far the actual ascent or descent continues beyond the Lowell area.
Isn't that rather important before you make assumptions about your data, how it applies? Citizen science in the science bit is important. And that's just by you, paragraph 3.4, completely unsubstantiated assumption, isn't it?
I'm reporting on particular data that did not exist, and precisely before the study took place, in fact, there was no data available beyond the immediate contours. And I, I think it's actually up on the appellants to come up with some data to present here, rather than on citizens without any funding to come up with particular data to kind of contest the assertions of the appellant.
Lots of data, and you made the point that, you know, or implied that the aircraft noise survey over 5 measurements were in some way the AP report rushed out to somehow combat the citizen science survey. As you rightly acknowledge, those surveys from July, August were undertaken well before we had your evidence. I'm not even sure, may have been a Rule 6 party at that time, I'm not even sure we were. But they were produced in the context of ongoing discussions with the Airport Consultative Committee, weren't they?
What I was not in those kinds of consultations, but as far as I understand, the initial report that was produced by the citizen researchers was being dismissed. I have a quote in my report where basically they kind of contested. May I
try to just
this is
on
important.
the question. The question was that report was produced, wasn't it, in the context of discussions that had been ongoing with the Airport Consultative Committee, not your evidence.
Well, precisely where they denied the initial results from the citizen survey. That's precisely why this study was important.
Why?
No, this is important in the sense that there was a disagreement. They were suggesting that they were disagreeing with the study, with the results of the citizen science study. And that's why they wanted to produce their own data. And I think once the airport produced their own data, they actually, maybe to their own surprise, actually confirmed the citizen science study.
That's obviously your interpretation. You end up by saying in your paragraph 4.9 that the level of uncertainty identified in this study suggests that a precautionary approach towards airport expansion should be adopted. But there is no uncertainty, is there? You've raised lots of questions. There is no uncertainty. The contours are there, they're accepted by the only other consultant appearing at the inquiry, Mr. Thornley Taylor. There is no uncertainty.
I mean, I'd be happy to take you through all the kind of uncertainty I found. For example, there's lots of reports of the Airbus kind of causing particularly wailing noises. These are intermittent. We have actually the particular flight behavior is quite unpredictable. We know that there's a big difference between the certification levels that are often produced in very ideal test conditions and real world conditions. There's a massive difference between them. There's a significant amount of uncertainty here that I think is not being represented in a phrase such as the cleaner, quieter, new generation aircraft, which imply a particular universal certitude, which I think does not represent the situation.
Do you accept that the inspectors have made their decision in the context of government policy, including the 16-hour average LAQ?
Of course, yeah. I think that's an important guide, but as we argued, these alternative and supplementary metrics are important to take into account. And as I argued, this is a unique airport, and because of the shelf flight path in particular, I think the single mode contour needs to be taken into account. There's about 100,000 people living in this area, and if their Saturday respite is taken away, I think that will have a massive impact on their lives.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Sorry. Are you any good with microphones? Just a couple of very short questions. So this survey you've done uses an app. One of my main bugbears in life is I'm always prompted by my phone to update my app. Does that have any bearing on the data in terms of if their app updates? Does that change things? Is that built in to the how you survey and the results in any way?
I think this is not an issue in this particular thing. I mean, it's using the same version of the app. All the citizen researchers were using the same hardware, and they had training beforehand. If they had any technical problems during it, that was resolved during the training beforehand.
So by the same hardware, you mean they're using the same iPhone and the same sort of model?
Sorry, I don't mean they're literally using the same phone.
Yeah.
They're not using one phone to take all along them, but they're literally using the same iPhone hardware. They have the same version of the iPhone, and that's significant because the iPhone actually has a much better microphone than the Android phones, for example, which have much less predictable microphones. You know, they have multiple producers that produce Android phones.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. We'll not get into the debate between Android and Apple. But do you have any questions in re-examination? So you're nearly there.
Thank you.
Okay. Just a few questions, Dr. Nold. So first, was the purpose of your study to measure annoyance from noise?
Certainly not.
Was it to measure absolute noise impacts from any particular aircraft?
He was trying to target the Embraer aircraft, but impacts implies human impacts. This was very much trying to do a relative comparison between two versions of the same Embraer aircraft.
And why, in your evidence in chief, did you highlight to the inspectors that your monitoring site and the Lambeth monitoring site used by the appellant were both within the easterly mode contour and the M65 contour, but outside of the average mode contour?
Because these are currently not in the LOL, but clearly important. And these are areas where the new generation aircraft are clearly not performing as they were intended. Or, sorry, let me rephrase that. The two studies are in the same shelved flight path, and that makes them directly comparable. And looking at the new generation aircraft is important there because we can see that there's very little perceivable difference in the noise level in that area.
If the inspectors were to reject Mr. Stewart's evidence and Haycan East's case that the single mode contours are relevant for assessing significant noise effects, so let's just assume that the decision is that we should only look at the average mode contour. Does your study still provide any valuable information to the inspectors for judging the likely noise effects of the proposal within the average mode contour?
I mean, as I mentioned, I think it raises questions about the extent of the LOL contour, precisely because currently the airport relies on model data beyond its known extent of the fifth static monitoring site. So the study is valuable in terms of raising questions about the gradient of that, the kind of at what point the new generation aircraft thrust noise reduction becomes useful.
Thank you, Dr. Mould. I have no further questions.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. That concludes your examinations. Thank you. And that concludes proceedings this week. So a nice early finish for us all on a Friday. Thank you. I have to say, you've given us some really great things to try and slot into our report. So yellow canary in a mine and golden thread. I will try my best.
It was a light reading. It's a good short story by John Mortimer, Rumpole and the Golden Thread. I'm not sure that any of the advocates here would seek to emulate. I don't know whether one should talk about the late Mr. Horace Rumpole, but we're not trying to emulate him. Madam, can I be allowed to mention the timetable?
I anticipated that, Mr. Straker.
I still am unique in having kept within the estimates.
Are you keeping score there, Mr. Straker?
And so I just wonder about the Tuesday, what is proposed, that's all.
Tuesday. So we've looked at it. I think given the timings we've got, a 10 a.m. start on the Tuesday would give us a bit more time in the morning just to prepare for the new week. If that's helpful.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Allowing me to mention the timetable.
Are there any other procedural points to pick up before we adjourn for the day?
I state it publicly and I hope that it's accurate and also so that it can be checked if needs be. My understanding is that we can leave papers in this room over Saturday, Sunday, Monday until they're ready for Tuesday. We don't have to leave everything home.
Did the airport confirm whether that's the case? There's nods and smiles. Yeah.
I'm very grateful for that because it does save a lot of trouble.
Looking at the boxes behind you. Okay. Mr. Humphreys.
One of the things raised earlier in the week, Dr. Chapman, was that he told us he was going to redo one of his tables on ultraviolet carbon and noise carbon and noise monetization. And I remember you saying that's partly in response to something I said. Of course, Dr. Chapman will need to get this in time because the appellants will need a chance to respond.
Yeah.
In the sense that we're not kind of squeezed right into the end, so that things are taken to prepare the thing, and then we have overnight to check it and say anything. So if you can urge can East Dr. Chapman to sort of produce that as soon as possible, that would be fair on our side.
Dr. Lane, you're nodding.
I don't want to necessarily commit us to responding overnight. We've actually got other things that we're trying to do as well, but just so that it doesn't appear on Thursday next week and we suddenly have to pick it up really quickly. We don't know what this is and what it's going to be. I just want to ensure that we've got sufficient time to respond.
I mean, we because of the amended timetable, we're doing closings virtually 2nd of February. So there is time. So I think if yes, and we're not sitting on Wednesday, so that can hopefully give some time. So do you know when Dr. Chapman is he? I mean, he's not here today. I assume he's working on it as we speak. Yeah.
Very keen, but I will speak to him this afternoon. I will try and make sure that it happens as soon as possible.
And if we could say close of play Monday, but if that causes him any particular issues to come back through the programme officer. And then we'll set a, you know, depending on what it is, we can set a reasonable deadline after that for response. No, it's,
Raise it,
yes,
Thursday or.
and everyone's forgotten about it, and yes. Yes, no, that's helpful, thank you. Anything else? No? Okay, well, thank you, everyone. It's been a sort of longish week, given the technical issues at the start, but we've pulled together and we've got going. It's been good. So thank you for everyone's efforts. I hope everyone has a safe journey back home, and we shall reconvene Tuesday, 10 o'clock. Thank you very much.